last recorded. But where do you guys want to start today? Do you want to talk about Bruce a little bit at the top of the show?
Yeah, I liked the order that you just did. Bruce, and then Moon Knight, and then Severance, and then whatever else.
Everything else, right?
Yeah, everything else, literally.
Yeah. So Bruce Willis. I mean, I would say, most people, if you ask them for some of like the biggest, I would say action stars, but just like stars of the late 80s to like the early 2000s, I think he would probably come up on a lot of people's list because, people like, Sylvester Stallone, Arnold Schwarzenegger, if you're talking action, definitely, people like those two names, Jean-Claude Van Damme. Bruce Willis, though, was a name that somehow managed to be in a lot of these action movies that are, classics, and then also kind of saw the opportunity, in the late 90s to kind of cross over and did a lot more genre, movie making and genre pictures. He was in some comedies, he was in some thrillers, and he just kind of just had like a nice resurgence at that point where I don't want to say ever lost relevance, but he had a few flops, going into the mid 90s. And then, with movies like, like Pulp Fiction and Sixth Sense just kind of resurged and kind of came back on the radar and people were talking about him again. And he is like one of those movie stars, that at one point in history was like a bankable name. And, people would show up for whatever new Bruce Willis movie was coming out because he was a leading man. And just a star, like, I don't know, like every time I think about him, I think about that period in time where like you couldn't look anywhere and you could not see like a movie that Bruce Willis was starring in, which was like one of the biggest movies of the year, or like you'd see him out promoting like his partnership in Planet Hollywood and like, those restaurants and everything. And there was just like this
Or playing
period.
harmonica as
Right. Yeah.
Bruno,
Right. Playing
the
music videos.
the blues pub rocker.
Just that power that he had,
Yeah,
like that itself right there was like the star power that he had, where, he had like, the ability to like have a side career as like a musician of some level of success. But I don't know, like, what do you guys think of Bruce Willis when you just, think about his movies, think about his star? Before we get into our picks for movies or performances, like, I think we should just maybe talk about like where he is on this like scale of movie star.
Um, I guess when I think about Bruce Willis, there are people who kind of transcend cultures. Um, I know I've heard my mom say on several occasions, Bruce Willis, Bruce Willis.
Right.
There's something about him that feels almost like, like Denzel, or he crosses cultures. Like there's no black or white with Bruce Willis. There's just Bruce Willis. It's what he represents to the culture. He's been in so many things and been so brave on screen for a lot of people, it's really nice to think that whenever I hear his name, I remember when Sin City came out and friends seeing him in a poster and being like, Bruce Willis is gonna kill his shit. And
right.
It was like an excitement. Like I remember that feeling. And this was all of my friends. So I think that's what I think about when I think about Bruce Willis and performances. I mean, there's an infinite amount. But I do have some like quirky favorites. I think I'm gonna go with quirky for this list. I know that for a fact.
Right.
I think that what we're all kind of what you guys are kind of getting at, and what I was thinking of, is just charm. Like Bruce Willis had a charm to him that made him a star. Like whatever that first thing you saw him in was, you kind of caught it, and people would refer to his smirk as like almost like it was a lazy thing, or that he played himself. And definitely, you talked a little bit about some of these kind of paycheck roles that maybe he's taken over the years, where he hasn't felt as invested, and it would sometimes dilute the memory and the feeling of just how great Bruce Willis is. Sometimes just to see him in movies where it felt like, okay, he's showing up, he's not really doing anything that's challenging him that much. But even sometimes doing super mainstream schlock, he still brought that charm and that
Yeah,
smirk
definitely.
and that kind of humor to it. And I think maybe this might be a weird thing to say because he was in so many huge movies and he was so great in so many things that, again, I think we're about to talk about. But like, he was such a star in those things. You mentioned it, Steve. He had like a name recognition. You might go see it knowing Bruce Willis was in it. Or
Right.
even if that wasn't your jam, you knew people were doing that. And that kind of feel this way about him. Like he's got this charm, this sex appeal, this whatever it is. He never quite became a name brand action guy. The way that when you say Schwarzenegger and you say Stallone, even Van Damme, you think a certain type of stardom. Bruce Willis was like a character actor in a leading man's body or some mixture of the two. Because when you really think about why maybe he didn't become Schwarzenegger or Stallone, it's because he mixed it up so much. It's because he had those you mentioned, the genre films that came along in the 90s and like, yes, he has, obviously there's one giant franchise and it's total action, classic everything that we associate him with, but outside of that, he just kind of did all kinds of different movies and seemed to make a point of working with great directors, like the way someone like Tom Cruise would do. Of like, you just got a sense that Bruce Willis was shooting for the fences when it came to like swinging for the fences, I think is what we say. You're shooting for something else.
The stars?
Shoot for the moon or the stars.
The moon?
Right?
Yeah.
Yes, the moon. But like, you get what I'm saying. That like he was like,
No, you're right.
He was
You're
almost
right.
like a character actor. He would choose these kind of interesting roles. The fact that he was not the most dynamic, maybe the most versatile actor, does not harm for me his legacy at all, because it's like those actors, you would say that they bring themselves to the role. He brought a kind of laconic charm and a sense of humor, and I think that that's something that a lot of movies need. And I don't know, there's something kind of quiet and patient about him that like he was not a showy actor. He doesn't, you can't bet that he's going to have a giant explosive moment in a movie when you see him. He might be quiet and restrained most of the movie. I don't know. There's just a lot to say about him that I guess we really should get at now by talking about these performances that might help fill out some of the things we're saying. So I just want to throw one out there because to me this is the first one, and this is like when I was a kid and Moonlighting came on. The character of David Addison on that show was so cool and so funny in that way that it's like it was the perfect pairing with Sybil Shepherd's kind of uptight, kind of manic comic energy. The fact it was a detective agency, I don't remember the details of the show, but I think she like inherited or ended up being left a lot of assets by some rich person. Maybe it was like a husband that died or something, or I don't know, it was a relative. I really don't remember that part of the show. But one of them was this detective agency that was being run at the time by David Addison, Bruce Willis's character, and he was like a drunk, and he, they had will they won't they energy from the first time you saw him together. It was just this guy. It was that guy. It was the guy whose comic persona brings the real spark to this show. It was a fun detective show. It ended up doing a lot of like, it would break the fourth wall. It would do all kinds of creative things that kind of inspired a whole wave of television shows that tried to be a little more cinematic. But when I was a kid, David Addison and therefore Bruce Willis kind of became, I mean, one of the only other characters that hit me so hard when I was a young kid was like, I don't know if you ever saw WKRP, but Howard Hessman's Johnny Fever character on that show really influenced me when I was a kid. He was like a cool guy and he was funny, and you could kind of tell he was like based on something kind of real. And I think David Addison was that kind of pop culturized version of that, which is like, oh, here's a fun, cool guy like Hawkeye Pierce on MASH or something, or like Bill Murray in the movies. That was the energy that he hit the scene with. So for me, he'll always be sort of like a secret comic genius because he was such a breath of fresh air, kind of playing against the type of the heroic character that he might play later.
Yeah, I think that was probably like my first ever awareness of Bruce Willis. I can remember watching that. Like, I know like my parents watched it, and I was just like, I have a memory of watching that show with them, and like then the connection of seeing him in big screen movies. It was like that leap, and like there's been conversation about like, since this announcement was made about, his condition and what his plans are, of like, there's discussions around like people that made that leap from like television to movie star. And, it's not an easy thing to do. And I feel like, his transition, especially into the kind of star he ended up becoming, because you're right. Like I made a comment earlier about like Stallone and Schwarzenegger, like those were the action stars. But I feel like, he had this ability to and has this ability to, in his roles, like something like Moonlighting, to go from that to an action film. And, he can be in action films, but he wasn't like an action hero in sense. Like he was like an everyman kind of hero. And in a lot of his performances, most of what we're going to talk about, like he was that kind of everyman person. And I think that's what made him so relatable, kind of what Rana was getting to a little earlier about like him kind of crossing over into different, cultures, demos, anything like that. There was just something super relatable. And even in his performance in Moonlighting, it was a very good comic performance that, he would later do in a lot of other movies too, which one of my picks is a comedy. And I guess I'll go next. I just wanted to mention, Zemeckis's Death Becomes Her as one of my favorite.
Yes.
Bruce
Awesome.
Willis.
That was one of my picks. You just cleared one.
That's one of my movies that just like, stands out to me, from the early 90s. Zemeckis kind of being able to do some off the wall zany comedy. And you're talking about people, like Meryl Streep and Goldie Hawn being the stars of the movie. It's their movie in a lot of ways, and he kind of plays the back seat to it. But I think that his performance in that is very funny. And, I think it's kind of, again, it kind of taps into the what he was doing in Moonlighting, just the chemistry that he had with, with the leading ladies that he was in a lot of movies with. But this one specifically, always go back and watch this movie and think about, the effects and like, just how funny and dark this movie is.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he stands out in the movie too, especially when you think about, who he's acting against and, just the idea of, he's not a good person in the movie, but yet again, something is very likable and relatable about his character and his performance that I think is what he was so good at, especially when he was like kind of in some of these like lighter movies, compared to some of the action movies or the thrillers that he did in the years that would come. But I don't know, thinking about his comedic skill and he was and he is a pretty funny and seems to have some sense of humor to him. But this one always stood out to me. And for the variety, I guess I'm going for a little variety in my picks. Yeah. So, and I think he has a lot of variety in his films, and people, could pick a number of movies. But yeah, Death Becomes Her is one that stands out to me.
I just want to add to that. I think one of the things you kind of hinted at, Steve, that I love about him in that is that, and I'm not saying that most actors wouldn't do this, because look who you're up against in this movie. It's Goldie Hawn and Meryl Streep, like in scenery chewing mode, and and she can turn it on, especially when she's in a comedy. Meryl Streep finds this other pitch that's just crazy, and Goldie Hawn like really doing her best to compete with that. So these are two like geniuses,
Yes,
that he like very wisely sort of accepts the kind of beta role of this character. And yes, Steve, it's a great gag that despite being kind of a spineless character, he sort of wins in the end. Like he kind of skates through, even though we find out how his demise occurs and all this stuff. I don't know, it's a funny performance because it's like at no point does he seize control of the movie in a way that could be deemed cool. It's a totally comic character, and I think that like it just shows that he had a better sense of humor about himself than you might have thought someone like him would have about like his image on screen. That he would play this kind of schlubby guy who kind of gets batted around by these two other characters in that movie. So,
yeah. Cool.
Ronald.
What do you got, Ronald?
I mean, Wes Anderson is one of my favorite directors. So this, besides like the Royal Tenenbaums, this may be one of his most palatable and maybe well-received movies. Moonrise Kingdom.
It's very warm and sweet.
Yeah, really warm and sweet. Bruce Willis plays like a security guard who's a sad guy who's kind of on the outs with somebody that he really cares for. And so the motivations of these really intense kids who fall in love with each other and run away, he understands, but he has to save them. And seeing this conflict that exists within him, and he does some action scenes in this movie. Mm-hmm. Just the quirkiness of it. I mean, like, it's like Tilda Swinton, Frances McDormand, these huge people, and then Bruce Willis, who is also huge and not really in this kind of movie very often. This silly, really intentionally filmed, super quirky movie, and he fits in so perfectly that you would not know that he wasn't a part of this band of actors that Wes Anderson typically picks. He's really on brand. It's like he gets the material. And if you want to, get a little misty eyed, watch Moonrise Kingdom. It's close to a perfect movie to me. It's
it's
so
Bruce Willis
good.
turning up that charm that I was talking about. Don't you think? Like, don't you think like that's what makes that character work so well in that movie? Is that he really is like a likable, good man. Yeah, no, I was that was one of the ones that sprang to my mind too, Ronald. Primarily because of what you said. He's working with a director like Wes Anderson, which was something he did back in the '90s a lot more, but he did less and less as time went on.
Right.
It seemed like he got a little bit less comfortable, kind of stretching his wings or being under the control of a powerful director. But I don't know if there's any real story to why his career kind of took that turn towards more mainstream, fare. Well, I'll just throw one out there that is, we're talking about kind of oddball turns. I think this was a great mix of like an action, sort of a genre thing that he would do, but also with just a very strange film and a strange performance in a way. But 12 Monkeys is a movie that I just think is like, I still think about it as one I could just about always watch because of just visually how interesting it is and how well done that aspect of it is. But the way that movie plays with going back and forth through time and the way that the sci-fi and the kind of is it all in someone's mind and then the time travel sort of, I don't know, it's a cool mix of things that reaches a real crescendo when it gets to the end in terms of everything kind of clicking into place. And it's a sort of tragic sci-fi story. I don't know. And it's got the Terry Gilliam touch of visuals that are really well worked out when he can work it out. But the rest of it is sort of, it's like the Terry Gilliam of The Fisher King, where he's kind of in the real world a little bit, and he's not, it doesn't feel so overdone as a Terry Gilliam film can kind of feel. And as everyone probably knows, if you're going to talk about quirky performances, it's got maybe Brad Pitt's quirkiest performance as well. And that was, again, let's think how early in his career he was doing, like Brad Pitt was doing this and A True Romance. He was very early on, sort of similar to Bruce Willis, sort of showing that, okay, you might think of me leading man style, but my heart is really in these performances where I get to maybe turn it up a little bit. But 12 Monkeys is, I haven't seen it in forever, but the more and more I thought about it today, I remember just seeing Bruce Willis in that thing. Like, Bruce Willis is a visually like striking image. His bald head. He's one of those guys who embraced the shape of his head very early in his career. He didn't really fight going bald, or at least after a point he didn't. But 12 Monkeys, I'm sure that's one of those kind of cult classics that people still keep in the rotation, but I don't hear people talking about it too much. Also, Madeline Stowe, remember her?
Absolutely, yeah, Madeline Stowe. 12 Monkeys always stood out. Like, it was that one that kind of was off the wall. Like, it wasn't like something that was, I mean, both for his involvement in it, but the Brad Pitt stands out. Obviously, Brad Pitt gets an Oscar nomination for that, which is, just incredible. But Bruce's performance in that really is the anchor of the movie. And I think that's kind of like, I don't know, I feel like that's kind of like a through line on some of these picks, because my next pick, I mean, is one of the more obvious ones. But, I just want to make sure we don't miss this. Not that I think we would skip it, but I think that The Sixth Sense is, not only something that reinvented his career and launched a career of one of the most successful filmmakers of our generation, but I think that, that performance in The Sixth Sense is something that surprised a lot of people in a similar way, that some of these other movies, like, I'm thinking this is one where it really was purely more of a dramatic performance, that really he didn't do a lot of straightforward performances like this. And I think, working with a screenplay that, some would argue is maybe one of the more perfect polished screenplays, produced in the last, 30, 40 years. And not to mention that this is a movie with one of the best child performances in it, maybe ever. And I think that at the root of that, again, I think it's this performance that Bruce Willis gives and really selling the twist of that movie. You know, it really kind of banks on the performance that he gives. And the whole third act really kind of beyond, you know, Haley Joel Osment's performance, which is again, I think one of the best child performances ever. I think that it's just, you know, Bruce Willis's performance in that is something that really shocked people. It surprised the hell out of me. You know, again, it's a period where, well, like I mentioned earlier in the episode, this was the time where I'm thinking there were some movies that came out that weren't that successful. And maybe you have a star that's not the star and doesn't have the star power that he had maybe even 5 years prior to this. But this movie completely reinvented him as an actor and brought upon opportunities that, you know, he would pursue in the years following it. But yeah, you don't talk about this movie, you know, as one of the best twists ever. Again, one of the best child performances, one of the best screenplays, I think, of recent years. And it really all kind of like goes through the performance of Bruce Willis. I think, you know, you're watching the movie with him and with this child, and I think that twist at the end really lands because of his performance in the movie.
I mean, his performance is a magic trick, right? I mean,
it really is. Yeah.
And it's literally a magic trick too, because it is so affecting. And what he's going through with his marriage in that movie is, or his wife or his ex or whatever we're watching as the movie goes along, you know, is so touching. And you're like, this is painful. There's pain in this character. And yeah, if I know there are people who say, oh, I knew it from the second, whatever. Bullshit. You get a, well, even if it's true, you get a, I'll give you a free candy bar after the movie.
Yeah.
You get, great. You ruin the movie for yourself. But even if that's the way you watch movies, that you can guess those things. Cause I've done that. I've been like, oh, is this a dream? And then at the end you go, oh yeah, it was a dream. But that doesn't mean the movie isn't a good journey. But it's the kind of thing where if that movie, if you looked away, if you looked at, they don't just create things to distract you from the thing. They create things to distract you from the thing you think you're supposed to be looking at to see the thing you're supposed to be looking at. You're so busy looking for ghosts in this movie. You don't really notice that Bruce Willis only talks to the kid who can see ghosts, you know?
It's crazy.
Right.
And the stuff with the wife then becomes, you know, watching it now and watching it as you know, it's at least good for 2 watches. I know some people would say that movie relies on the twist, and I think that's where M. Night Shyamalan, we've talked about it before, and we'll probably talk about it again. His best movies, the twist adds to the story that was already good.
Yeah.
Or makes the story that was already good have that final like clicking into place that you want to have that makes you satisfied when a movie ends or whatever. But I mean, I guess I'll piggyback on this a little bit just because I don't think it's that different. But Unbreakable was obviously an offshoot of this relationship with this director. And I couldn't decide which of these movies to pick. And I guess, like I said, I'll just kind of piggyback this on there. But I think Unbreakable had some of those emotional moments. Like it was like M. Night learned that, yes, Bruce Willis can handle these emotional moments in this kind of fantasy framework, and we can really hold on him. And there's some great, like super charming, super like heroic, super moving moments with Bruce Willis in Unbreakable, where he gets to be interacting with the world a little more. But I think that movie wouldn't exist if not for the way that he turned that finely tuned performance in Sixth Sense, where the movie literally like as much as the movie needed this wonderful child performance in it, it completely hinges on just our assumptions about Bruce Willis being the star of the movie.
Yes.
And his ability to carry that off, and also to play, as I said, the pain of that reveal, as opposed to it's not like a Twilight Zone moment. It's an emotionally ruinous moment, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Ronald, what's your next
one? 2007's the Fifth Element is
someone had to
sci-fi. Many could consider it schlock and ridiculousness, and it feels like it could have only been made in the 90s, and it feels like the last of those like silly, like, man, what would the future be like when it's really like so far-fetched that it's probably not going to be like that for a couple thousand years, maybe. But but like my mom, it's one of my mom's favorite movies. Like legit, whenever it came on, she would watch. She got the DVD and would watch it. And it's just because it feels like a world where everybody is just there, existing, getting along, and while this chaos is happening around them. And Bruce Willis is basically doing Die Hard in space. But good God, is so entertaining, man. It's one of the better movies that I've seen in his collection, just because it's so rewatchable. You know, you may not agree with it, you know, being great story wise, and it gets a little schlocky in the middle. But goodness, it is so fun. It's a fun ass movie, and Chris Tucker's performance, incredible, like incredible, like and you know, we'd seen him in other things, you know, Friday and other films that he'd been in, but this was like Dead Presidents. This was something so different, so unique, and you know, it took, especially back then, man. Like he's like, if you could imagine, like he was coming off of this like street credibility, right? And then he goes into this like very androgynous, silly character that was having sex with women, but you wouldn't have expected it. It's a strange character, and I feel like he demanded that part. He's like, I must have sex with a woman in order for you to know that I am straight in this movie. So it's neither here nor there. But yeah, Fifth Element is such a fun movie. Mila Jovovich, amazing.
I was going to say, when you said
1997.
1990. What did I say? 87?
2007.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, 97. Sorry about that.
You said it,
but then I referred to the 90s. So yeah.
Yeah, I know. I was like, wait a second. What year was it?
Yeah, 1997. Sorry.
But then you also said that it looked like 1,000 years from now. So in 1,000 years, people will wear bandages as clothes. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely. Bandages as clothes. Okay. And we'll be jumping on the tops of floating cars in space.
That's a very visually cool movie, very well realized movie. It always bugged me that The Fifth Element was love. Like in my cynical self, when I went to see that movie, I think that bothered me at the time. But I think that as far as the visuals, this is another one where like just the look of Bruce Willis in this film is so iconic, and the he's used that way. It's like someone, you know, knows how to use his image, his look, his physicality, whatever. That's a movie where really he's a good action figure. Like, it's kind of cool to watch him. Well, for my next pick, I don't know which of these lines to say. You could say one of two lines that would be like, well, we've got to mention these two films. So maybe if I don't say one of these lines, one of you guys will say the other line, and then we can all agree that we know two of his most iconic performances. We've talked enough about these kind of indie films that he did, and even though maybe he was in one of the biggest indie films of all time, and he's great in it, I'm going to say yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
Yippee-ki-yay, motherfucker.
John McClane. I'm not even talking about the franchise. The first movie is such a classic film that to this day people will say Die Hard on a submarine, Die Hard at the zoo, Die Hard underground. Like it still represents something. Now you might say what that's come to mean. Oh, it represents terrorists taking something over and then people having to escape. But what I think of is one of my favorite things in all movies, and we mentioned it earlier about him kind of being a character. His characters take punches. You know, that's the thing that Harrison Ford always brings to his characters in an action movie too. Is that there's a comic aspect to the guy who's almost a badass enough. Like Indiana Jones is always getting knocked down, and so is John McClane. John McClane's walking around barefoot on glass. He's like, he's not prepared for this. So it's not just that terrorists have to take something over, because there's a lot of Die Hard on a whatever where it's got like a blank tough guy or a Jean-Claude Van Damme type guy at the center of it. But what made Die Hard so great, and really I didn't see it in the theaters. I didn't see it on video. I saw it when it hit HBO, and I just started watching it anytime it was on. Yeah. I loved everything about it. It's just like all the rhythms have been absorbed into every other action movie ever made since then. Everything about it has become iconic. The villain, the European, the vaguely European nature of the villain, you know. But that idea of the kind of misfit hero who's really not ready, who's crawling around in vents and having to be, creative, and I don't know. Yeah, this guy John McClane is somehow, I mean, I think we've kind of told the story of, oh wait, he's this action guy, but he managed to hold on to this quirk factor. John McClane is a very unlikely action hero if you compare him to the role Stallone would have been playing that year, the role Schwarzenegger would have been playing that year. And I think that's what it is that we've been kind of getting at all this time about this guy, is that he's one of those actors who, for all that he may have become somebody who seems like he takes a certain kind of laconic role, he really was not that when he started out. Like there was something, you know, this guy freaked out in the middle of this movie because he's so outmatched, you know, and he's running around like, what is he wearing? Like a
white tank.
A white tank, and like slacks, and that are that are rolled up. Anyway,
the world building in that movie is just incredible. Like, you know, he's coming to see his wife, who he's on the fritz with, and he goes to the apartment building to get to the building to the floor to see her. It's like the 30th floor.
Or the business where she works, right?
Yeah, where she works. But they kind of live in. It's a weird setup. They can't really explain that to me. But so he goes to the front, and he has to type in her name. So he types in McClane. Then he realizes that the woman that he's married to is no longer has his last name, and he's like hurt. You feel for him. Mm-hmm. He's like you. He's already a damaged puppy going into the situation, and then the terrorism is happening around it. It's like all the cool elements, and everything pays off in that film. Like everything that you see has shows up in another portion. You're like, why is this black kid in the garage of he's so cool. There's no way that he will not appear again. The black guy that's hacking the computers, it's every little piece pays off in some way, and then it creates this tension where you're like, this has to come to a head at some point, and it does in such a cool way in the last act. Like, it's so good.
It really is.
I think the thing that stands out, like, yes, Die Hard is obviously, that was my last pick as well. I mean, I don't think you can talk about Bruce Willis, without talking about Die Hard. And I mean, I think the Die Hard franchise itself could be mentioned, but you're right. The first one is, the best. It's a classic. Like, it's so rewatchable. You can watch this movie every year, but it's, I think, obviously, we've talked about it a ton already, but I mean, I think the thing that stands out to me is just like, I mean, to be blunt, like, you watch a movie star be born, really, in this movie. Yeah. And I mean, like, John picked Moonlighting as his first one, and to think that this happened while he's still on Moonlighting.
Yeah. It's like his second big movie. He did he did Blind Date, the Blake Edwards movie, and then I think this was his next big movie.
Right. And you see that jump from like this comedy, and even Blind Date, a comedy. And I think, this movie has tons of comedy in it. And like, I think that's a part of the performance that is the best thing about the performance is, this cop sense of humor, and like just his way he kind of is a little more like kind of lighthearted about a lot of this stuff until it starts to ramp up. And even through it, he maintains like this sense of humor about it. And, and again, this is probably one of the best examples of like the persistence, of this underdog, and he's like this star who's not really an action star, but he's just driving through this film like a wrecking ball. And super quotable. What's the other quote? Is it the Coast quote, or what were you thinking when you said the two lines?
Oh, I was saying from another movie. I was saying Zed's dead, baby. Zed's dead. I was just thinking about that as like another.
Got it.
You can't discount Pulp Fiction. For me,
right. Okay, I thought you meant the two the quotes from this. I always think of.
No, I'm sure there's at least 2 or 3 more lines that are famous from this movie. But we all
come to the coast. We'll get drinks. We'll have a good time. Like that quote.
Right. Where he's kind of talking to himself
when he's in the vent. Yeah.
Come to the coast. We'll have a great time.
Yeah.
Well, that's David Addison. I mean, that's that Moonlighting humor. Yeah. Right.
But I don't know. Die Hard is a classic, great performance. John McClane, talk about somebody's filmography, or like what are the performances, like what are the characters' names? Like some stars, you know, people may struggle to name the names of the characters that they played in their, you know, their films, or the ones that come to mind really kind of float to the top as like the legacy films of this person's career. And you know, a couple may come to mind for Bruce Willis, but John McClane, you know, beyond Bruce Willis, just in movie history, you know, John McClane is a star. And yeah, probably one of my favorite action movies ever. And John McClane is just you know, it's a legend, man. It's definitely one of the best.
Yeah.
So what was your final pick, Ronald?
My final pick is it's not a huge role for him, but I like Bruce Willis and other people's sandboxes. The Robert Rodriguez, half of a big long movie, Planet Terror, Lieutenant Muldoon, and like seeing him in that element, like, you know, Robert Rodriguez is so fucking crazy, and seeing Bruce Willis there in that environment with, you know, this zombies and helicopters chopping people, it's just like, it can't get any crazier than that. And he's so game for it. You know, I love how game he was for that movie. You know, it didn't feel like he was making fun of the material. He's as serious as they come in that film. And it's a nuts performance. The whole thing is a bag of crazy. And I'm so glad that Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino actually got to make that film. There's so many cool people in it, but particularly Bruce Willis stands out to me in that film. I you know, it's stuck in my head with that beret on.
You know who else stands out to me in that movie that for whatever reason, I thought he was so good, and it's hard for me. I'd have to watch it again to figure out what it was that really stuck with me. You want to take a guess who else I thought was great in that? In Planet Terror in particular.
Is Brolin in that?
Yeah, Josh Brolin.
Yeah, he's great.
He's so good in that, and I don't know why. I think he just was playing such a sleazy.
Played the
like
doctor,
he knew
right?
Yeah, he knew, but he knew exactly what kind of role. Like knowing that it was a grindhouse thing, he was doing a very '70s version of like a manly sleazy guy. There was just something, I don't know. He was using his Brolinness in this weird sleazy way that I don't know. I always love it when an actor manages to turn what's cool about them into into something kind of gross. And he's chewing on a toothpick or something. He just has this energy that's so like, macho asshole. I don't know. I just remember him being great. But I
gonna
feel
rewatch
like
it.
maybe I overrate Planet Terror. At the time when I saw that, it was my clear favorite of the two movies. But I haven't seen Death Proof. I've seen Planet Terror once since then, and I've seen Death Proof nunts since then. So I don't know. Maybe I loved though that night of going to see basically a double feature with these fake trailers. Everyone who was there at the theater was there, like practically like with pajamas on, ready to sit there for a long time. It was super.
Yeah.
I wish that had become like an annual thing where they might trade out one movie or bring one back, or you know, they just would start doing it. But I don't think it was enough of a box office smash for them to treat it like a franchise.
Right.
But no, I loved that was a really fun night at the movies. All right. Well, Bruce Willis, obviously there's more that we could talk about, but I think we got a good cross section of the years, you know, and that wasn't like all early. Was Moonrise Kingdom the most recent of the movies we talked about?
Was that 2012 or?
Yeah, it's 2012.
Yeah.
I think it was the most recent.
Yeah, I think that is the most recent.
I'm sure I'm forgetting something that if I looked at his IMDb in detail, I would find. But I didn't have to look to think of these great performances that we've talked about. So
the one I was going to mention, like right at the intersection of like just a period in time of him doing Moonlighting, Die Hard, and then the next, like one of the next things after Die Hard, like I think the year or the year after, he was the voice in Look Who's Talking, which cannot go ignored because Look Who's Talking was like a monster hit, and was, you know, I have very fond memories of that movie, but I just think that the voice performance in that, I think he's hilarious as the voice of the baby in it.
Did he do any other really famous voice work? Because I was thinking about that today, and
He's
I'm
in
like,
one of the Lego movies.
Was he?
He played one of the voices in one of the Lego movies.
But I was trying to remember if he did some famous animated character that I'm just not thinking of, because it seems like he would have. But maybe I was thinking of the Look Who's Talking movies, because that was definitely a voice performance that you heard. a lot.
Right. Excuse me. Yeah, he did do another one. He was in the second Lego movie. I don't really recall it. I remember seeing on the list, but he didn't do a lot of animated stuff or voice
Isn't he
work.
crawling through the vent at some point? It's just a gag about him being stuck in the vent somewhere. I think that's it.
Yeah.
I think it was like a cameo in the second Lego movie where it's a little
be.
Lego of John McClane and he's like lost in the vents and he hasn't made it out or something.
I also got to just mention Armageddon real quick because that almost
you don't want to miss
I wanted to have like some comedies and drama and some action, and those were my picks, but Armageddon is like, I love that movie. I don't care. I love that movie. And I'm just gonna say, like, of the two movies, well, I don't know, The Rock's really good too, but like of Bay's movies that are on the Criterion collection, I just think that I remember the summer Armageddon came out, like it was just like the movie. And his performance as Harry is just, I thought was fun in like the first half of the movie as like, as Bruce Willis would be. But I genuinely like love the last pieces like of him with Ben Affleck and his daughter, and like when he makes that sacrifice, man, I remember being knocked out by it.
I haven't seen it in a while.
I love Armageddon.
Give it a watch.
I love it. It's stupid and silly and big and loud, but I mean that's most Michael Bay movies. But I would say that's probably another one that most people would probably think of when they think of Bruce Willis too. But yeah,
I mean, if people were watching Michael Bay movies at that point and going, "Wow, this is big and loud and full of effects," like, hey, he hasn't even gotten started making that kind of movie yet. Armageddon is like a character drama compared to the Transformers series in a way. So,
right.
And I do think that's whether you think it's cheesy or not, that whole arc is an iconic arc. We've maybe have seen it done in other things, but the whole like taking the sacrifice, like knocking somebody out basically to take their place in the whatever. It's a great like last moment move for that kind of story if you really want to go for the heartstrings. So I think that I think that even if you don't know that movie, that happens in it. Do you know what I mean? It's
right,
like,
definitely, yeah.
And yes, it is a little,
because the song and the music video, and it just kind of was everywhere in culture, that summer.
And I think you need movies like that where like Michael Bay's making a movie where a bunch of people have to fly out and blow up an asteroid before it hits Earth. Like if we didn't have movies like that, then movies like Nomadland wouldn't be so special. You got to have both, right?
It's the balance.
I just watched a new movie like that. Moonfall.
Oh, I was gonna say, I was like Armageddon walks so Moonfall could run.